You did the thing. You earned the money. You cut the spending. You set up the transfers. You watched the balance climb from a number that felt embarrassing to a number that felt almost suspicious. And yet, somehow, nothing inside you changed. The anxiety is still there. The Sunday evening dread is still there. The quiet calculation you do in your head before you say yes to dinner is still there. You escaped the rat race, and nobody noticed, including you. Ben is 38. He earns $92,000 a year, which is the kind of number that 10 years ago he would have considered proof that he had made it. Ben drives a sensible car now. He canceled half his subscriptions. He cooks more than he eats out. He has been quietly, boringly, consistently investing for the better part of a decade. From the outside, Ben looks like a man who has his life together. From the inside, Ben still feels broke. Not in the obvious way. Not in the way he felt at 25 when the rent ate half the salary and the overdraft was a lifestyle rather than a mistake. He feels broke in the more frustrating way. The way where the math says he should be fine, but the feeling has not caught up to the math. And that gap is quietly ruining the life he spent a decade building. Here is the first thing to understand about the rat race. Most people think the rat race is about income. It is not. The rat race is a relationship with money. Specifically, it is the relationship where the goalpost moves every time you get close to it. And the cruelest part is that the goalpost does not move because you are greedy. It moves because you never actually defined where it was supposed to be. Ben never defined his number. He had a vague sense of enough, a vague sense of secure, a vague sense of the point at which I can finally relax. But vague senses do not survive contact with reality, because reality keeps presenting new things to worry about, new things to compare against, new versions of "but what if" that feel completely rational in the moment. So Ben keeps running. Not because he needs to, because he has not yet given himself permission to stop. Here's the thing almost nobody talks about in personal finance. The moment you escape is not loud. It is not a celebration. It is not a confetti cannon. It is not a morning where you wake up and suddenly feel free. The moment you escape is quiet. It is a math fact that arrives without a feeling attached to it. And if you do not know what to look for, you will blow right past it and keep running. Let us look at the math. Ben has been investing consistently for about 9 years. He started small, awkward amounts. $200 a month, then $350, then $500 as his salary grew, and his spending did not grow to match it. He bought a broad market index fund. He set it to automatic. He mostly stopped looking at it because looking at it made him feel like nothing was happening. That is the feedback gap. In the early years, the growth is real but invisible. The brain runs on visible evidence. When the evidence is delayed, the brain decides nothing is working. So Ben kept grinding, kept trimming, kept feeling behind, and the account kept growing without his permission. Today, that account holds roughly $87,000. Ben does not think that is a lot of money. He thinks it is a start. He thinks he is still in the building phase. He thinks real wealth is somewhere up ahead, past the next milestone, past the next salary bump, past the next decade of effort, and that belief is the thing keeping him in the race. Because here's what Ben has never calculated. What does $87,000 actually do? At a historically average annual return of roughly 7%, $87,000 generates about $6,090 a year in growth. That is roughly $507 a month, produced by the account, not by Ben's labor, not by his salary, not by his discipline this month, by capital that is already sitting there, doing the only thing capital knows how to do. Ben's basic living costs, the stripped-down version, the rent and food and bills version, the version where he is not upgrading anything, are roughly $2,400 a month. His investments are not yet covering that, but they are covering roughly a fifth of it. And that changes the math in a way Ben has not let himself feel. Because the rat race is not the moment your investments cover your entire life. The rat race ends the moment your investments cover any meaningful portion of your basic survival. That is the threshold. Not financial independence in the dramatic sense. Financial independence in the structural sense. The point at which your money starts paying for part of your existence, and your labor is no longer the only engine keeping you alive. Ben crossed that threshold roughly 2 years ago. He did not notice. Nobody noticed. Because there was no notification, no bell, no moment where the universe leaned in and whispered, "You can ease off now." There was just a number on a screen, and a man who kept running because the feeling had not caught up to the math. Behavioral economists have a name for part of this. They call it hedonic adaptation. It is the tendency of the human brain to return to the same baseline level of satisfaction, regardless of what changes around it. You get the pay rise. You feel better for 2 weeks. Then the new salary becomes the new normal, and the satisfaction returns to where it was before. You hit the savings milestone. You feel proud for a weekend. Then the milestone becomes the new floor, and the anxiety returns. The goalpost moves because the brain recalibrates. And the brain recalibrates because it was never actually tracking the number. It was tracking the feeling. And the feeling is not something the number can fix on its own. That is the trap Ben is in. He is chasing a feeling using a tool that cannot produce it. No account balance will ever make him feel safe because safety is not a number. Safety is a story you tell yourself about what the number means, and Ben has never updated the story. Here is the second half of the trap. Ben not only moved the goalpost, he also kept measuring himself against people who were ahead of him. Because that is what the brain does when it has no defined target. It picks the nearest available comparison and calibrates against that. Ben does not see his own progress because he is too busy comparing his Chapter 9 to someone else's Chapter 20. He sees the person with the $400,000 portfolio and thinks, "I am behind." He does not see that the person with the $400,000 portfolio started 10 years earlier, or earns twice as much, or had a different starting line. He just sees the gap, and the gap feels like evidence that he is not there yet, even though there was never defined. So Ben keeps grinding, keeps trimming, keeps saying no to things he could actually afford to say yes to, keeps living like a man who is one bad month from disaster, when the math says he has not been that man for years. And that is the quiet tragedy of escaping without noticing. You build the freedom. You just never let yourself live inside it. There is a third part of this trap that almost nobody names. Ben does not just move the goalpost outward, he also moves the starting line backward. Every time he learns something new about money, he retroactively reinterprets his past as a series of mistakes. The $4,000 he spent on a holiday in his 20s was not just a holiday anymore. It was a missed investment. The car he financed at 26 was not just a car. It was $430,000 of future wealth he handed away for a slightly nicer ride. The years he spent not investing become, in hindsight, not just empty years, but expensive years. And the more Ben learns, the more his own history looks like a ledger of failures. That reinterpretation is not useful. It is not even accurate. But it feels accurate because the brain has a habit of judging past decisions using information that was not available at the time. That is called hindsight bias, and it is one of the cruelest cognitive glitches in personal finance. It makes you feel like you should have known then what you only know now, and that feeling keeps you running because the finish line is no longer just enough. It is also enough to make up for all the years I wasted. And that finish line does not exist. No amount of current progress will ever retroactively fix a past that you have decided was a mistake. So Ben keeps running, partly toward a future he cannot define, and partly away from a past he has decided to be ashamed of. And neither direction has an endpoint. Ben's turning point was not a windfall, it was a calculation. One evening, he sat down and worked out for the first time what his investments were actually producing in an average year. Not the balance, the output, the amount the account was generating without him doing anything. And when he saw that number, something shifted. Not because the number was huge, because the number was real. It was not a projection. It was not a someday. It was not a goal. It was a fact. A portion of his existence was already being funded by something other than his labor. And that fact changed the story. The story stopped being, "I need to keep grinding until I am safe." The story became, "I am already partly safe, and the job now is to let that safety grow, not to keep pretending it does not exist." That is the reframe Ben needed, and it is the reframe almost everyone in his position needs. Because the rat race does not end when you hit a number. The rat race ends when you stop running. And you stop running the moment you realize the ground beneath you has already changed, even if your legs have not got the message yet. So Ben does something different. He does not invest more. He does not cut more. He does not grind harder. He recalibrates. He works out his actual monthly cost of living, stripped of the upgrades and the fear buffer and the just-in-case spending that comes from scarcity rather than need. He calculates what his investments are currently producing per year. He divides the first number by the second number, and he gets a percentage. Right now, his investments cover roughly a fifth of his basic survival. That number is not the finish line, but it is the proof that the finish line exists, and that proof is what changes the feeling, because the feeling of being stuck was never about the money. It was about the absence of evidence that the money was working. Once the evidence arrives, the feeling has somewhere to land, and the moment the feeling lands, the running slows. Then Ben does something he has never done before. He defines the goalpost, not in vague terms like enough or secure, in actual numbers. He writes down 3 thresholds. The first is the point at which his investments cover his basic survival. The rent, the food, the bills, the floor, the number below which life becomes a crisis. He is already past this one. The second is the point at which his investments cover his actual lifestyle. Not the stripped-down version, but the version that includes the dinners, the trips, the things that make life feel like life rather than endurance. The third is the point at which work becomes optional. Not retired, not finished, just optional. The point at which he could choose to stop or to do something different without the choice being forced by fear. Those 3 numbers give Ben something he has never had in his adult life. A map. Not a vague sense of someday. An actual position with an actual destination and actual milestones between here and there. And the moment the map exists, the running changes. Not because the math changed, because the story changed. Ben is no longer running from an undefined fear toward an undefined safety. He is walking from a known position toward a known destination, and the distance between them is shorter than he thought. That is what escaping the rat race actually looks like. Not a yacht, not a retirement, not a dramatic exit. A quiet recalibration where the math finally meets the feeling, and the running stops because you realize you are already home. Ben does not quit his job. He does not stop investing. He does not suddenly become a different person. He just stops treating his financial life like an emergency. He starts saying yes to things he could always afford but never let himself have. He starts letting the account grow without checking it every 3 days. He starts living like a man who has built something, rather than a man who is still trying to build it. And the strangest part is that nobody noticed the shift. Not his friends, not his colleagues, not the algorithm that used to serve him content about escaping the rat race, because it could smell his anxiety from a mile away. The shift was internal, the math had already happened, the feeling finally caught up. The race was over. It had been over for 2 years. Ben just had to stop running to see it. If this felt uncomfortably familiar, let me know in the comments whether you have ever done the calculation on what your investments are actually producing. Not the balance, the output. And subscribe if you want more videos that treat money like the life story it actually is. Because most people are closer to free than they realize. They just have not done the math that proves it.